Welcome to the Inside Sales Enablement Podcast. Where has the profession been? Where is it now? And where is it heading? What does it mean to you, your company, other functions, the market? Find out here. Join the founding father of the sales enablement profession, Scott Santucci, and trailblazer Brian Lambert as they take you behind the scenes of the birth of an industry. The Inside Sales Enablement Podcast starts now.
I'm Scott Santucci.
I'm Brian Lambert, and we are the Sales Enablement Insiders. Our podcast is for sales enablement leaders looking to elevate their function, expand their sphere of influence, and increase the span of control within their companies.
Together, Brian and I have worked on over 100 different kinds of sales enablement initiatives as analysts, consultants, or practitioners. We've learned the hard way what works, and maybe what's more important, what doesn't.
And our focus is on you as a sales enablement leader and orchestrator. Sales enablement leaders need to develop specific characteristics that we call orchestration to operate in the blended domain of strategy and tactics, where you do both. Our goal on this podcast is to help you clarify what that looks like, provide examples that you can then take in action in your own company, and give you confidence to engage up, down, and across the organization. And as usual, we have a centering story. So Scott, what do you have for us today?
So I'm going to lead with a quote, and I'm going to ask you to see if you can place the quote and the time period.
Okay.
Here's the quote. Why is water that is vital for all life cheap and diamonds are so expensive?
Isn't this something tells me that this is like the 1980s or something, and a technology reference, like a Steve Jobs keynote or something?
Close.
It is?
Very close. Yes, it's Aristotle, and it's about 300 BC. You were right close.
You got my hopes up, only to bash it upside the head. Okay, well, fine. Aristotle's a smart dude. I can go for that. Fine.
Well, I guess he's Steve Jobs-ish in the sense that he's got big thoughts.
And they probably both wore like sandals.
There's the close part. So why are we talking about this in diamonds? Around the time of Aristotle, many of the Greeks actually believed diamonds were literally tears of the gods. And between then and in the Dark Ages, many kings wore diamonds on their armor because it was a great sign of health and virility and safety. And then in 1477, I guess that's the Renaissance time, Maximilian, who at the time that this happened was the Archduke of the Habsburg Empire, later became the Holy Roman Emperor. So there's your Italian quasi connection there for you, Brian.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Nice payout there. But this is pretty interesting. In 1477, he became the first person to actually propose to a woman using a diamond ring.
Ah, so it's his fault. I see.
It is his fault. So we fast forward to 1938, and the reason 1938 is a very important time is because at this point in time, the De Beers organization, we all know about De Beers, cornered the diamond industry. And they commissioned a study because most of the diamond sales were happening in the United States at the time. And what's significant about 1938, yes, it's during the Great Depression, and there was a big dip in diamond sales. They commissioned a study, figured out that before 1938, you know who they were trying to sell diamonds to? Directly to women. And what they found out is that they needed to sell diamonds to men, and specifically around this whole engagement ring phenomenon. So a woman named Dorothy Diam did a bunch of this research, and when it first came out, they came out with she's the one who came up with the Diamonds Are Forever program.
What's her name? Dorothy what?
Dorothy Diam.
I thought you said Dorothy Diamond. I'm like, what did she change her name? Okay. Dorothy
that would be
Diamond.
Great.
Yeah.
She's actually credited as being one of the first people to do product placement. So that
Diamonds Are Forever. I remember
Diamonds Are Forever. That's right. So that became the slogan. And by the 1950s, diamond sales had jumped. At the time, they were promoting one month's salary for what you should pay for a ring. That went so well, they doubled it to 2 months. So those things are all going on. Now, what's interesting then, and at the same time, in 1954, so think about alchemy. We've talked about alchemy before, people trying to make gold, and people have been trying to make diamonds or synthesize diamonds. And it wasn't until 1954 that synthetic diamonds could be produced. Today, synthetic diamonds are its own industry in upon itself. So you have the regular mined diamonds that are used mostly for gems, but then the synthetic diamonds are used for machine and cutting tools. They're used as thermal conductors. They're used as optical materials, electronics, and increasingly as gemstones. And to bring this full circle, part of the reason gemstones are becoming an option is because of environmental reasons, and people are becoming more concerned with it. So, for example, it takes about 250 tons of earth to produce 1 carat of diamonds, or also some of the poor working conditions or the like. So what you have is, coming back full circle to Aristotle, why is water vital, and why are diamonds so expensive? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons for diamonds, and a whole bunch of people have different value for it. So that's our centering story, full circle, from Aristotle to Aristotle, between 300 some odd BC to 2020. And we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, thanks. Great lesson, I guess. But I got to ask, so what? So what does this have to do with sales enablement?
So what this has to do with sales enablement is the first part of that word is sales. How do we make sales today? And one of the things that we need to concentrate on is selling to value. And what does actually value mean in the first place? No human being on the planet can live without water, but water is cheap and prevalent and inexpensive in most places. Whereas none of us need diamonds to survive, but diamonds are expensive. So what actually is value? And the reason that that's so important today is as we move into the digital economy, where customer experience becomes so important, what actually is valuable? Is the product and service that you have, is that what is valuable? Or is it the outcome the customer achieves? Is that what's valuable? So that's what we're talking about today.
Great. Well, we have with us to help us unpack this, and actually we're using this this podcast in an interesting way. I think our listeners are going to love to hear about this. We've got Jen Burns with us. Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about Jen and have her introduce herself, and then I'll come back at the end and recap what all this means to orchestrators.
Well, I'm super excited to introduce Jen for a variety of reasons. So Jen and I go back a ways. Jen actually was one of the participants, Brian, if you remember. The Sales Enablement Society didn't start as a Sales Enablement Society. It started as the Washington, D.C. local Sales Enablement networking group, which I titled. Right. That was my baby.
That's why you're not in marketing.
That's true. That is definitely why I'm not in marketing. So Jen joined us there. Jen's been on the board of directors of the Sales Enablement Society along the way, and now she runs sales enablement globally for a company called IQVIA. So the fourth thing that I'm excited about is I'm really interested to see how Jen reacts to our centering story and connects the dots of what we're going to talk about. Jen, would you care to add some color about who you are and introduce yourself to Insider Nation?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm kind of nervous about the pivot to the centering story, but we'll see what we can do from that perspective. But it was a great one. So yeah, I'm Jen Burns, and I'm Senior Director of Global Sales Strategy Enablement Training at IQVIA, as Scott mentioned. And I'm really excited to be part of this podcast tonight. I think it's been quite a number of years, actually, since Scott, you and I have been on a webinar or podcast together, and Brian, similar to that. So So it's great, and a lot has happened since then, particularly since our early society days for sure. But but I'm very excited to kind of get into this topic today, particularly because we're preparing for a keynote this coming week at our Global Sales Conference, which Scott is going to be leading, and I will be joining him in the discussion. So really important that we start to flesh this topic out, and wanted to use this platform to really kind of think through some of the key issues to ensure that when we put it in front of the sales team, it makes sense and they can start leveraging some of these techniques. So it's really important, for me and for my organization to ensure that we continue to drive, value to our customers, and very, very excited to discuss what that actually means today. So yeah, really great to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. So in case you're wondering and following along, let's make sure we're paying attention really crystal clear. Jen is doing this podcast because she's practicing, and she's practicing for a keynote presentation that, we're going to do together. So we're going to do a keynote presentation for the sales kickoff that she's got in a few days, and we're practicing landing some of the concepts. So I just want to make sure that everybody recognizes that we all have to practice. We all have to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations. We're asking our salespeople to get outside of their comfort zone. I think this is a great opportunity to highlight that Jen's doing exactly that. So with that, having said that, let's talk about value, and why is this topic so important? Doesn't everybody know what value means? Jen, why is talking about value such a central theme for sales organizations in 2020?
Yeah, so I think, it reminds me back to the days when we were trying to put a definition behind sales enablement, right? It kind of means something different to every person. And, I think for every sales enablement practitioner that's listening to this, or even a salesperson or marketing professional, the word value is a very nebulous term. And I think, frankly, we throw it around, in a way that it doesn't really clearly provide value, right? So when we say we're value selling or we're driving value to our customers, I think we really need to be careful about how we use that term, because what ends up happening is it doesn't carry meaning. And one of the reasons, why, Scott, I'm so excited to be working with you and Growth Enablement and trying to, work through what the definition of value really means to our sales organization, so we can continue to drive growth. It's really thinking about, what it means to the customer, because I think we all want to define it from our lens, but really, the value is what the customer thinks it is, not what we think it is. And so there's a lot of, ways that I think we can get to that answer. And so really excited to start working through, one, how we do that, and two, how we communicate it to sales so that they can articulate it in a much stronger way to our customers.
Right. And one of the things where this problem begins or starts really comes down to, as businesses, we tend to go to market. And when we go to market, we think, well, let's make a list of all the different products that we've got, or capabilities that we've got, and let's compare those capabilities. And how do we compare those capabilities? Either by the speeds and feeds that we can prove and demonstrate, or what we can demo, or by how we compare against our competitors. And I think the observation that we're on, Jen, and I'd love you get some add some more clarity about that, is as we build more and more capabilities, one, we can't communicate all that stuff to people. It becomes overwhelming. And two, from a customer standpoint, one of the challenges is how are we going to get everybody who's involved in that on the same page, and how are we going to turn those capabilities into value for us? So are you seeing similar situations, and how do you go about preparing the right kinds of materials to have a value-driven conversation?
Yeah. So let's unpack this a little bit, because I'll give you my perspective, and then actually I'd like to get yours, right, on, potentially a different direction. So
well done.
In a very simple way, right? The way that and I will come out and be transparent and say that this is how I typically view value, right? And I think others do as well, is that when we're trying to prepare our sales organization to sell more effectively and have better, deeper conversations with buyers, we often anchor that conversation to what our solutions are going to drive, right? So, what can we increase or decrease? Can we drive revenue growth, right? All of the key buzzwords that everybody uses in their marketing materials or sales conversations. Of course, that's all talking about products. And while we absolutely want to share those things, and they're very meaningful at different parts of the conversation, conversations that we have with buyers and other key stakeholders, I don't think they're the things that really set us up for a good consultative relationship so that we can help our buyers understand, what is that value that they're looking for, right? Because we think myopically that it's directly, related to our product and what it can do versus what actually is going on within the organization that directly impacts that definition to them. So I would actually turn it back to you, Scott, and just get your thoughts on, one, is the pattern kind of that you see directly correlating value to product versus people actually digging into the value that the customer believes that they're trying to drive, which may be influenced by things going on in their environment. And then how do we actually think differently about that as we're crafting, our resources and tools for sales? Because it's a very difficult thing for me to kind of get my hands around.
Yes. So Jen is leading with all of you guys. She has a more refined view than what she's sharing. So Jen, you and I both have had experience talking about this concept of productitis, and it's been really well received inside your company. I think that's really where things start, is that we've just got so much muscle memory about wanting to talk about what we've got that we're losing sight of what's valuable for customers. That's one point. The second point is, I think it's really difficult so let's say that Brian were a real estate agent, and Jen, you and I had a business partnership where we're looking to buy some real estate. If Brian referred to us as buyers, we're going to be put off because we haven't bought anything yet. So I think another challenge is let's move off of thinking about the people that we're trying to sell to as buyers, because it desensitizes it, and we treat them like there's some formulaic thing out there just waiting. They have all this demand for whatever our product and service is, but the reality is they don't. The reality is we have to create demand with them, and maybe we don't treat them as buyers. We treat them actually as customers and human beings.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, honestly. And and frankly, if we were doing our jobs well as salespeople, we want them to recognize, in many cases, problems they may not realize exist. So if there's no problems in their mind, they're not buyers.
That's right.
So it actually makes sense to say it that way. I agree with you.
So when we unpack that, then what makes it very difficult is we're in the B2B world. So in your case, Jen, at IQVIA, you sell to pharmaceutical companies. So pharmaceutical companies are multinational, large, complex entities, and that's what we're technically selling to. However, we're also selling to human beings as well. And I think this is where things become challenging, is to not confront the complexities that exist in a B2B organization to start off with. So one of the things that we have developed is what we call a value equation. And there's three simple parts to it. There's the impact that we can bring to bear to the company that you have to co-create or agree on. There are costs, and there's a bunch of different categories of costs, from switching costs to opportunity costs. And then there's risk factors. And I think the reason that I want to spend more time on the risk factors is that's where a lot of humanness kicks in. In most cases, we're selling across multiple stakeholders, and that's hugely, hugely politically risky for people. And if we're not putting ourselves in their shoes, the fear factor of doing something different becomes overwhelming. So that's another aspect of it is how much empathy do we really have for the stakeholders that we're selling to? Do we understand enough about what they do on a day-to-day basis? And then how do we connect the dots between the breadth of our capabilities and helping them achieve an outcome? So we've been through some of this together on this, Jen. What are your remarks on focusing that way, and why do you think that stuff is so important?
Yeah, certainly the complexity of the sale, in different environments certainly drives a lot of that, right? But I think if I'm kind of making it relevant to the sales environment that the sales organization sells into now that I support, of course, we need to really focus on, in order to serve our customers in the most effective way, how we can understand not just their business, right? Because anybody can go out and do research and learn about how these organizations operate, but really make it unique to the specific things that are driving that organization and the different stakeholders that have to engage with each other to make things happen. And of course, the more and more we try, to lean into the complexity and understand how it all, functions, and all orchestrates together to be successful, I think the more successful we will be as salespeople, and as an organization in supporting our customers. And it's important for us to think about those things as we go into sales conversations versus how does my product fit into this company? And I don't think it's an easy thing to do. I think it takes a lot of preparation and hard work and practice to be able to build a narrative around what that value story should be. But the difficulty becomes, how does it impact the different, to your point, like if I'm dealing with different stakeholders across this organization that I know I need to all, get to gain buy-in to drive my relationship forward, understanding what value means to each of those different people is not an easy thing to do. And of course, from a politics perspective, an operational perspective, a cultural perspective, it all matters and has to weigh into the overarching strategy. And I have to say, I don't know a lot of people that just inherently operate that way. And so it's a really exciting challenge to try to think about how this value equation can be leveraged to, systematically change the strategy, but also give us very specific ways to look at individual stakeholders and how they all should work together to solve a challenge or, drive their execution strategy forward.
I could tell listening to you, Jen, that you wanted to use some specifics that we're struggling with right now in that. So you did a good job of generic and not revealing any details for your company. One thing that I would say is what's so challenging is that putting the details or putting the things that are important in a human-to-human conversation into PowerPoints or documents is really, really difficult. But wouldn't you agree that when we ask people to stop thinking about the deliverables and the stuff and concentrate more on having a conversation about these individual stakeholders, say a chief commercial officer, a business unit leader who owns a therapeutic area, a CFO, different folks like that, it becomes way easier. Would you agree that that's been at least par for the course when we've been dealing with some of the salespeople?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's more easier to attach, your approach to an individual person and what their role is in that organization than it is to look at the big picture and try to sell something that just is going against the grain, if you will. Right. So breaking it down in that way, I think is more digestible for a salesperson to attack. I mean, they need the tools and resources to be able to do that. But yeah, I mean, I've listened to previous podcasts that you guys have done, and there was, I think Bob Apollo, who spoke recently, was talking about, the importance of finding someone who wants to drive change. Yeah. And normally, that is, if we're thinking about kind of the grouping of stakeholders that, that most salespeople will be focused on, targeting, you might be lucky to find one person who has that type of mentality or is in a role that's a change agent, if you will, and maybe it's more than one, and that's fantastic. And then you're really, in for an exciting ride for sure. But I think if we think about it that way, it will make it much easier for a salesperson to kind of break down their strategy and tackle it with the most amount of, leverage that they can going into these conversations. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, that resonates a lot with me. It's sort of that, it's that hero's journey that people will go through. And you've got to be able to find somebody who has the intestinal fortitude or the appetite or the courage to actually tackle something new. What we're talking about is that our salespeople are actually change agents in upon themselves, and they have to find a counterpart who is willing to have the courage to drive that and recognize that it's actually a journey. So those are some of the things that are that we're talking about. I think the difficulty we run into, Jen, is the farther you get away from the point of sale of the customer, and the more you think about abstract things like markets and personas and tear sheets and things that folks would build in silos, it makes it really difficult to connect the dots between the breadth of capabilities that we have inside our company versus the kinds of materials that our salespeople need to equip those change agents with the things that they require.
No, exactly. And I mean, what you just described is productitis.
Yeah.
It's going into market based on the things that you want to say because you need to get it out and you believe that that's valuable versus, listening to an earnings call and understanding what drivers, are happening across the organization, and then, kind of back end, backing into it, right, around, well, who should I be going after, right, from a stakeholder perspective that would care most about this initiative based on how it aligns to, the solutions that my company can offer. Like, that is a different strategy in my mind that can help set a salesperson up for success versus caring about, a tear sheet that just isn't, gonna move the needle in the fastest way for most salespeople. So I think it's just thinking about it differently, finding the opportunities to drive high level value, and then connecting to the right person to understand where it really becomes relevant from a very specific perspective.
So how have you been handling, as a sales enablement professional, you're stuck in between these two opposing forces, right? On the one hand, you want to be more customer centered. On the other hand, you have an organization that's organized into individual silos that wants to tell or prescribe salespeople what to do. How are you balancing between those two? And what would be ideal for you if we could create a better definition or North Star of what value is?
Yeah. Well, I would say, one, it's remarkably difficult. And it's in every organization, right? I mean, every organization I've worked in, it's very much the same. And I think it's a common challenge. And it's really hard because obviously, in most organizations, particularly sales and marketing, there's goals and objectives that everyone has to meet. You have to drive leads, you have to grow the pipeline. And I think organically, we get stuck using the same muscles over and over and over again because, we know that they do work in a lot of cases, but it doesn't work in the ways that we really need it to change the game. And so, for me, it's been hard because, obviously, most of the things that sales enablement leaders anchor onto is, how can we make our reps sell more effectively? How can we leverage, value-based selling versus, features and functionality selling or, product selling, if you will. And all of those things are very effective. But really, when it comes down to it, I think we're not doing the best by our sales organizations if we think about that alone, right? It's more, what does the customer, really care most about? And then organizing our tools and resources around that. And in order to really be able to do that, you have to drive change across your different cross-functional teams that support sales, because it has to be embedded, as we know, right, into the heart of everything we're doing, whether it's product strategy, marketing, enablement, and even into customer success and delivery. So there's a lot of things that we need to do to kind of make that change happen. But the best place to start is, like we've been talking about here, is the customer. So I think for me, it's really kind of building the structure and framework around understanding how to do that effectively, because, like you kind of mentioned earlier, it's not about a buyer persona, and not every, CMO or CIO or CTO cares about all the same things, and they play different roles in different organizations. So being able to think about what are the ways that you can get to understanding how roles work in each of the different organizations that are in your territory or in your named account list or whatever it is. How do you tackle it in understanding that, the different stakeholders and what they're doing to move the needle in their organizations every day? And then, figuring out how to build resources to do that isn't easy. And that's why we're talking about this today.
That's right.
So, it's daunting, and I'm just being honest, because, look, I work in a big organization. There's a lot of different moving parts and pieces. I can't walk into a meeting and say, this is what we need to do, let's change it by tomorrow. It takes a lot of, teamwork and collaboration and orchestration, internally. And we're at the beginning phases of really trying to drive a more customer-centric model. But this is, I think, the very beginning stages of an exciting, path that we're going to go down that will transform the way we support our customers moving forward.
Yeah, so I want to piggyback on
that. Was a lot. Sorry.
No,
get excited.
This is great. Part of what we're trying to do for our podcast is to just have honest conversations for people like yourself. What I want to highlight is, I think, we talk about this all the time, Jen. I think you do yourself a bit of a disservice about the wins that you've got. One of the things that has been fascinating is to actually have a conversation about who's the adult wallet owner. And what we have found, that there's not a lot of general agreement of who exactly the adult wallet owner is. You have some people who say that are huckleberries, for lack of a better word, that the person that we're after is a CIO. Some people say no, it's the head of a brand or an individual drug. Other people say no, it's the executive committee or the head of sales or the chief commercial officer. And what we're finding is all of them can be right based on the situation. So how do we create more scenarios based on that, while moving away from this idea of a persona? And these things are challenging, but as long as you stick to it, it's been very illuminating. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because, I'm very guilty of building buyer persona maps. I've done it multiple times. So I cannot act like I have not fallen into that trap before. I absolutely have. But, now that looking at it from a different perspective, one, there's a couple kind of thoughts that I have based on what you just said. One is, if there are varying thoughts about who you're selling to in your organization, one, I think there's some positive ways you can look at that, but also it's also very telling that the concept of buyer persona actually doesn't exist, because, our sales organization and our sales leaders are very successful. They have varying opinions, but what that tells me is that they're selling to roles, not buyer personas. So in their mind, right, the sales strategy that they have in tackling, these different markets that we're selling into, even though one might think it's this person or this role, and one might think it's this person in that role, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, maybe on the surface, it's confusing as to how that could happen, but really, ultimately, what that means is our strategy is probably more aligned than we think, but maybe we need to mobilize it around something different, like to your point, right? So what are the roles that we should be tackling, not titles? Yeah. So yes, of course, the C-suite, everybody wants to get there. Yes. So we can't ignore that fact. But in reality, is every person in our sales organization selling to the CIO? No, not even close, right? So how do we think about where those impact points are, those value points are, and we sell to that versus selling to the title, of that person in the C-suite. And I think if we do that, then we'll more easily get to the C-suite because the story that we're telling will resonate so much more strongly with that individual than otherwise, it would have. So anyway, this is a topic I think a lot of people would have a lot of opinions about, of course, but that's kind of what I'm seeing.
Yeah. So I think what's challenging is there's a lot of existing tools that you can plug in to do to create a set of slides that says, "Hey, here's the answer." But because those are all just different perspectives from either a marketer's viewpoint, a sales trainer's viewpoint, or an individual salesperson's viewpoint, it misses the mark. And I think what we're finding is that if you identify, hey, these are the different people who have money that can spend with us. Let's just make a profile and then see how big of those bags of money they are, right? Because a sales operations person might not have many bags of money at all. He or she might just be an approver. So as we plot that out, then we can say, based on where they are in their organization, what value levers can they pull? And what's important to them politically? Because that's where the humanness kicks in. And when you start plotting that out, for those listening, Jen and I and somebody else we're working with, Matt, we've been playing around with this idea like we're playing The Wire and we're plotting out the crime syndicate or whatever. It makes it a little bit lighter. But what you see are very, very clear patterns. That there are some things that are impactful for some stakeholders that other stakeholders just don't care about. There are some cost drivers that some stakeholders care a lot about that others don't care. And then there are risk factors that are common that everybody cares about that we're just not equipping our salespeople on how to handle. And it's those risk factors that if you think about that value equation we talked about, the impact that we can bring to bear is going to be unique to each individual stakeholder. The cost drivers that are associated with it are going to be unique to that individual in that company. But the risk factors are going to be common. The common risk factors being, can we execute on this? How much political capital do I have to invest? How hard is it going to be to drive adoption or operationalize it? What would I do else instead of doing this? And challenges around your culture. Those are all real human things that go into the decisions that we're just not talking about.
No, I mean, it hits such a chord with me, honestly, because if you think about the impact and the cost, right? Those are things that you have more control over in your dialogue with your stakeholders, right? The impact points, of course, differ depending on, the organization or, the specific individual stakeholders that you're working with. The cost, of course, to acquire a new technology or switch or what the implementation is, right? We have a little bit more control of that because those are known factors in most cases. But the risks are the things I think we lack empathy for. And I think the productitis, conversation is so critical here because this is where, you can say, oh, we understand our buyer needs and our solutions align to the needs and, we're going to drive these business outcomes. And we understand that if they want to switch from this competitor to us, it's going to cost X. All of those things are known factors, but it's lacking complete empathy for what that particular stakeholder or champion or change agent has to deal with in order to get this over the finish line. And if our salespeople understood how to navigate that complexity, I think everything else falls into place because it just takes one wrong conversation. And it doesn't matter how much your solution can drive X, Y, or Z, it falls flat on its face. So if we can prepare our salespeople to actually think about those things as they head into these engagements, I think it will make them drastically more successful without question. And I guess, Scott, just from your experience, and you've interviewed a ton of executives, across sales organizations and salespeople. I mean, what have you found, I guess, is kind of the biggest missing factor that people are not thinking about as it relates to risk?
I think just having a conversation about risk, frankly. One of the things that I like to do is put a sheet in front of folks that just asks the questions, and really be able to say, look, I know you and I both know that you go as we go off, this meeting's going well, but you're going to wake up the next morning and you're going to have some questions, and they're going to reach at the pit of your stomach, and it's going to make you feel like the juice ain't worth the squeeze. So we need to be able to have a human-based way to bring that stuff out. So what I like to do is think about just asking some questions, or actually having it on a sheet of paper, so I'm not asking them. It's even lighter than that. On that sheet of paper, can my team execute and accomplish this, whatever we're talking about? If you're even questioning that, let's talk about it. Hopefully you've got resources, in your company that can do that. That's one. Another one would be opportunity costs. If we do this, what won't we do? So let's keep people, let's remind people that if we're tackling a change initiative and tackling change, it means you're going to not have to do something else. How do you factor those things in? How do you begin to make the case to get there? You don't just immediately start doing something. You got to plan it out a little bit. Yeah. What about the political capital? How will I sell this program internally? Here's the thing. I would say the number one thing that we're missing with salespeople is to realize that they're great communicators. And if we can turn them to help with the internal selling for our stakeholder, what executive wouldn't want that help? I mean, who wouldn't? You're going to help me get buy-in on other people? Well, let's turn our salespeople to be that internal advocate. Benefit realization would be, when will we see the early results? So you give them a game plan to say that focuses on where the quick wins will be. And then a culture fit. How do you define what common cultural barriers are to overcome? I think those are the five most common things that, no matter what executive you're talking to, being able to diffuse a lot of the intensity and the emotions that are in sales, that are involved in evaluations today, having conversations like this helps diffuse a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, this couldn't be more spot on. And honestly, I would love to spend 10 minutes going into each one, because not literally, just, I think they're all really important topics as it relates to how, our sales team engages. And, one of the things that I was thinking about is I was listening to you explain kind of the different components of risk, is how the salesperson could take each of those different elements and think about how it impacts the different stakeholders that need to engage. Because I think most of us just inherently, sell one way. And even if we think about all the different dynamics that our, key stakeholder would be faced with in their journey and driving the engagement forward, it's preparing that person to face all of these things. And to me, that's where I can drive more value to my sales organization, is if the end outcome of this, right, is that I could support my sales team with tools and resources, and they may not be tangible things, right, but more so just a change in mindset, because they're fantastic and they can find creative ways to do this in their own way. But just having the mindset shift around, thinking about the different stakeholders and how they sell the program internally. What does that mean? It means something different to every single person along that chain. It's not just your direct stakeholder that you're working with. It's the 5 other people that have to, sell this up the chain potentially, or across the organization. And And each person will have to do that in a different way. So they need to look at the engagement in a different way. And I think, I'm sure there are people that do this inherently, but most will just, it's a one track train that goes down, right? And we try to do the best we can to figure out how to manage different people. But I think we really have to break this down and give them the tools and resources to think about each of those components for the various stakeholders that they have to engage with, because it really does matter a lot.
So my reaction to that is a couplefold, right? You mentioned that it may not be tangible, it might be a mindset. I think part of our challenge is we have to help create more space for salespeople to think about the human element. Part of the way of creating more space is to eliminate a lot of the quote unquote things that people think are so concrete and tangible, but are just slides for slide's sake. Then we need to create tangible things that help have these conversations. And what's interesting about this is if you just get a salesperson, or frankly anybody, to ask, okay, the kind of thing that we're asking our clients to do, would you advocate it for you inside our company? Would you be willing to take that kind of risk? Because if not, then just showing up with more deliverables isn't going to cut it. You have to recognize that people are putting their careers on the line for this kind of stuff. And we have to make sure that the reason sometimes our salespeople are so pissed is because they know they're asking their clients to make career bets with them. And if we're not showing up and giving them stuff and thinking that risk management is some sort of lecture or something you can put on a key card, it isn't. Risk management really is about the risk of the people that we want to champion for us, their risk of getting fired. That's what we mean by the risk factor. It's more of an emotional, or actually it's a combination of emotional and reality. And the more we take the risk out and make us easier to do business with, the greater off we're going to be, and the more value they're going to be able to see and perceive.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. And what comes to mind to me is, a lot of people think, I have this account in front of me and I have to go sell them absolutely everything in my bag because that will make me smash my quota and I'll sell lots and I'll make tons of money. And while, of course, we all want to do that, right? It's more about really understanding how your value cascades. And it's, of course, we're not saying we don't want to get the big deal, right? We all do. But are we planting, the right seeds along the way to really ensure that, we're driving value to that customer in the most meaningful way long term? Because it isn't always about, going to grab the biggest deal and moving forward to the next one. It's really about, setting those foundational elements. And I think this strategy around leveraging this value equation will help us, really understand how to manage our relationships with our customers more effectively, which will mitigate a lot of the risk that, that we don't want to end up, not positioning our key stakeholders, well enough for, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
And it's not going to be easy to do that, but I think if we first change the mindset and then we upskill around how do we do that effectively in our current ecosystem. And then 3, it's how do I, right, as a leader in my organization, work cross-functionally and in an orchestrated way with my peers to ensure that we can evolve and transform our support infrastructure for the sales team to be able to do this more effectively. Because, initially we're going to have to rely on people to, start taking these steps on their own. And then ultimately our goal, will have to be to build, kind of this treasure chest of things, if you will, that will help us, do this, moving forward. So I think it's exciting. Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I just want to share one key point.
Yeah.
What's interesting is when you start factoring in, are able to say, this is the business problem that exists inside our companies, the client companies, their organizational business problem. This is the adult wallet owner who owns it, and here are the risk factors. The only thing that mitigates the deal size is what access level you have, not how many products and services you've got. And I think that's kind of the big shift, is that if you're going to sell to the adult wallet owners, then you could have you can literally close big deals all on one sheet of paper, because that's how executives think, and they want to move forward on things that are going to move the needle on their business. They don't want to spend a ton of time on it. They want to take action. That's the way they work. If we think that we have to show them speeds and feeds of 75 different products and services and bring in 30 different people to demo it, well, what executive is going to want to listen to that? Heck, would you want to listen to that being sold to?
Yeah.
I wouldn't. Would you?
Exactly.
So I think that those are the things, to highlight here, is to make this come full circle. Why are we talking about value and what value is in 2020? And how does this relate back to Aristotle's question, the ongoing question that has been with us since we started thinking, right, as human beings, what makes something valuable? And in today's economy, where there's a lot of change going on, one of the things that's really, really valuable that we're not paying enough attention to is our ability to listen, to untangle complexity, and to give clients a common, clear path forward. And that's what we're talking about with de-risking. So that's how we tied it all together that you were nervous about beforehand. How do we do on that, Jen?
Yeah, no, it was an awesome conversation, and it has me definitely thinking differently about, how I can think about value and prepare, our organization, our sales organization to, to position value with our customers. So I think it was very much well connected, Scott. I feel much better about the centering story than I did in the beginning, for sure.
Yep, and that's the thing. Depending on what you look at or what lens you put it in, even diamonds. People evaluating diamonds now because of the environmental impact. 250 tons of dirt to get one carat of diamond has people asking whether or not these things should be valuable or not. So the environment around us changes. So that means what's valuable changes. And I think one of the things that we have to lean into is we are in the midst of a major transformation of our economy. We're in a digital economy now. And that means organizational silos don't cut it, which means our salespeople have to navigate that. If they're able to navigate that, then they're going to be the ones who are problem solvers and our competitors won't be. So that's basically our wrap up. I'm going to let you have any parting shots before we turn it over to Brian and wrap up our podcast.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, I thought it was an awesome, conversation. I think it's good to distill down some of these topics for, obviously for our keynote, and, just thinking through the impact that we can have here. And I would just say one final thought as I kind of pull all of these things together in my mind. It's really about, how are we thinking of the bigger, value that we're driving in an organization beyond just the point solution. Yeah. And I think that's the nut everybody's trying to crack. And I think if we can, really tease out this value equation, and it can be, scalable and repeatable, across the different sales strategies we have, I think it will be unstoppable, because we have the value already.
Yep.
We do. We have best in class solutions. We just don't articulate it the right way. So if we can articulate it in a different way, a better way, I think we will be tremendously successful. So, thank you guys so much for allowing me to be part of the discussion today. I thought it was really beneficial for me, and I'm excited to take this forward.
Excellent. So Brian, wrap us up.
Great. Well, one of the things that you guys talked about, and I just wanted to tie off on this, Scott, was the value equation. And you and I have talked about it, but I'll outline it here quickly. I just want to make sure our listeners are tracking what the value equation is, because you've used it a lot on the podcast. But it's actually an equation that you came up with where the perceived value is equal to the impact minus cost. So the impact of the solution, the cost minus the cost divided by risk. Can you share just a little bit more around that, Scott, so our listeners have a definition of the value equation before I wrap up?
Sure, I think we can publish that out, but there's the whole idea is that value is perceived. Value is in the eye of the beholder. The idea that we're going to create one scorecard or one ROI calculator or things like that might be true for lower level buyers. It's not true for executives. Executives aren't going to believe our ROI calculators anyway. So it's all about perceived value. And with that, you think about this as impact minus cost is the top part. That is the numerator. And then the denominator is risk, and specifically risk of getting fired. And if you think about that, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to come up with your impact drivers. Like, are you helping them achieve cost savings? Are you helping them with adaptability? Whatever the driver is. Then you have costs. And the costs aren't just the cost of acquiring your products and services. Costs include switching costs. Costs include training costs of getting their people up to speed on it. Costs are involved with adoption costs. There's a variety of different cost drivers that are all very, very common and standard. And then Jen and I spent a lot of time talking about the risk factors. So just when you think about risk, think about why they might get fired. What's going on in the minds of those executives? They're in these roles for a reason. They're good at what they do, and they don't take a lot of risk for arbitrary risk. So if you can just think through and put yourself in their shoes, how they might think about it, that is way more of a factor. And what you want to be able to do is, if they perceive a high degree of risk, their overall value equation to them, or the perceived value, is going to be low. If you take risk away, the value increases dramatically. And that's the number one variable that you can use moving forward to move deals forward, is to de-risk them.
That's great. And so if you're drawing this out on a piece of paper, you've got perceived value equal impact minus cost on the top, and then divided by risk. That's the equation. And you guys did talk a lot about risk. That's actually where I'm going to start. And as our listeners know, I recap this based on the 6 attributes of being an orchestrator: focusing on mission and goals, driving results by design, not effort, etc. So when I was listening to you guys, and that's why I wanted to clarify what the value equation was, because the number one thing that stands out during this conversation is this discussion in and of itself. Like, where is this actually happening in most organizations? Go sell value. Jen was talking about driving value, value selling, value added. There's just the word value. It's nebulous. We assume that people know. And then, Scott, your brief walkthrough of this value equation that you just now did, who's having these conversations internally to simplify it for sales? And it's like, hey, sales, just go do it. Go add value. Go sell value. And this conversation's been around, what can sales enablement do to focus on missions and the mission and goals, to orchestrate this discussion so that salespeople have an easier time of it. And it's a human discussion that needs to happen. So there, Scott talked about, there's a lot of tools and slides that we can just plug in and say, hey, here's the answer. But those tools are not, they're very isolated. They're very isolated to somebody's perspective about training, or somebody's perspective about field marketing. They're not about an integrated view of the value equation that we just outlined. Jen also talked about the idea of focusing on understanding the customer's business, but moving beyond just this word customer. And you guys were pretty loud and clear on the word persona and how generalized that can be, to get to the real people involved and patterning out the real people involved, so that we can have the right type of enablement to help salespeople navigate. You guys also talked about prioritizing the right goals at the right moments, especially around the productitis discussion that Jen brought up a couple times. where sales and marketing have specific goals and specific initiatives and activities, but those activities don't actually translating into more customer empathy. And their customer empathy is, empathy about Bob or John or Sally, or, individual people on the buyer side of the conversation and what they are faced with. And Jen had a great point. She said it only takes one conversation to kind of tank an executive sale. And the reason for that is you're dealing with human beings, and they're not just going to buy because you show them something, fancy or something that's overly simplified. Another piece of this was the nature of orchestration was loud and clear. The salespeople, if they do their job right, they're asking their customers to change. And in today's COVID world, it's more than that. They're asking their customers to put their neck on the line, to put their career on the line, especially in these bigger sales. And when you look at it that way, the hero's journey and what it means to be successful in that customer's organization, they're faced with a lot of the same challenges that salespeople are faced with. But who's listening to salespeople, and who's actually helping salespeople get the tools and also listening to them in a way that provides the reality that salespeople are facing so that they can be equipped. And then the last piece, or the last outcome, is catalyzing change through collaboration. Understanding what value means to people, it's easier said than done. We all have to practice. The context for this whole podcast is Scott and Jen are going to have a keynote. And these types of discussions and role-playing this out is really important for all orchestrators to think it through before you get on the phone call or go live in front of people. And that's what's really interesting and fascinating about this conversation. It's a prep for something that's going to be live action. And I'll also say, and the final piece of this is, this podcast, I wish it could go 2 hours. Sometimes I hear feedback, well, it's over an hour and I don't have time. But I found myself so enthralled with this conversation, I forgot to take notes because it was so fascinating. And it's one of the very first, and I know we've done 2 other podcasts on value, but to me, this is one of the first ones where it got real in the sense that it's something that salespeople need so desperately, yet the conversation just isn't happening. So for all you listeners out there that hung with us this whole time, my gut's telling me that this was the fastest hour that you've had if you're an orchestrator on our show. So that's the recap I have for you guys, Scott and Jen. Great conversation, and look forward to continuing those conversations. And Jen, good luck in your keynote.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. And that's our show. Scott, do you want to take us out?
Sure. So first of all, I want to highlight, it's amazing, Jen. It's just really, really amazing. You have the courage to kind of role play out on a podcast. I've maybe lied to you that we have 6 listeners. We have more than 6 listeners, but I think it takes a lot of courage. But at least for me, I think it's really valuable to get a chance to practice beforehand. And I can tell by where you were going. I think I know where we're going to end up. So hopefully you feel good. How do you feel good? How do you feel about having done this and being ready for for the keynote that we're going to do together? I'm not doing it. We're doing it together. How do you feel about it?
Yeah. No, I feel really good. I mean, obviously anytime that you roll out new concepts like this, it's risky because you got to make sure people understand how to take it and run with it after the fact. So I think in talking through it, it definitely gives me a pretty good idea of, how we need to make sure that we're giving them something they can grab onto. And then we have to really work hard at evolving it, moving forward. So I feel good. I think it's going to land. I'm excited about it.
Well, of course it's going to land. I mean, I'm doing it too. But
yeah, exactly. That was a dumb comment.
But here are the things that we were worried about before. We wanted to make sure from a design point. I think this is valuable for other folks. So we talked, I guess last week about what this was going to have. It was more than last week. But number one, we have to have an idea of why to get people to pay attention to why we're talking about value in the first place. And I think we have some good ideas on that. Number two, how do we make it tangible to where it's not just theoretical? And I think if we talk about the inventory of some of the different stakeholders and some of the accounts that we've had a chance, Jen, to profile this and connect the dots between different business problems that different altitude levels of stakeholders have, the individual stakeholders, what they care about, and then create a lot more space on the empathy part for the risk, taking the risk out. I think that accomplishes goal number two. And then goal number three, which you brought up, was, hey, how would we get them to profile it so that they have something to bring it forward? I think at least hearing you talk, it was great. I could see your gears turning. I can't wait to talk and once we stop recording. But do you feel like we were able to accomplish those three design points?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I did. And I think just really quickly, and I know I'm overstaying my welcome here, but I think the tangible piece is really, for me, the most important, because I think conceptually these folks are going to be very excited about, thinking about their engagement differently with some of these concepts. I think helping them, put pen to paper, if you will, is the exciting part. And I think once we can do that, they're going to just be super pumped. Yeah. And it's kind of one of those things where, as a salesperson, and I was one for many, many years, you hear something like this and you can't wait to go try it. Yeah. Right. Like, this is something I think our sales team, which, for the most part are executive salespeople, are going to hear this and they're not going to be able to wait to go start having these conversations. So that's what gets me excited. I know they'll be excited and ready to rock and roll this week.
Awesome.
Well, great job, you guys. It was a great conversation. And listeners, if you have feedback, if you have thoughts to share, let us know. Also, check out orchestratesales.com, the new home for the Inside Sales Enablement podcast. You can join the site for free. Let us know what you think about the new site and what we're doing there. And we'll see you on the next show. Take care.
Thanks for joining us. To become an insider and amplify your journey, please make sure you've subscribed to our show. If you have an idea of what Scott and Brian can cover in a future podcast, or have a story to share, please email them at engage@orchestratesales.com. You can also connect with them online by going to orchestratesales.com, following them on Twitter, or sending them a LinkedIn connection request.